How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. This is Lars, and we are here at my little urban homestead. And today is an exciting day because we are going to be getting out here into the garden. And my first step is to assess everything that has gone on in this winter. Obviously, winter takes a toll on your garden beds, and we certainly need to get in here and check everything out to see how everything's going. So let's get started with that and see what we need to do to get these beds refreshed and ready to get planting. Alright, so this is what a garden bed looks like after it's been asleep all winter. What I typically do at the end of every garden year is I'm going to lay down as much mulch or covering that I can in the garden bed so that it covers the soil and gives it a nice warm blanket for the winter. But in the spring, I've got to come out here and see whether or not that blanket that I gave it last fall was enough to keep everything nice and healthy. So first of all, let's get in here and take a look and see exactly what happened through the winter. Step one, we're going to move everything out of the way and get down to the bare soil. This was much thicker during the winter time. It was several inches thick. But over the winter, it had compacted down and provided a nice cover for all of the living microorganisms that are in the soil. So now that I've got all this hay out of the way, or actually this is straw. There's a difference between straw and hay. This was straw. Once I get the straw out of the way, I have access to the soil from last year. Now, if you have a nice soil bed and you've done the right job, this will be very easy to get into. If you still have work to do, if you need to layer in compost, or if there's just a lot of really hard, dense materials in your soil, you're not going to be able to get into it. But I've been working on this soil for about 6 years, so really it should be pretty easy to get into. I won't even need to use a shovel, most likely. So let's just get in here and see how it looks. As you can see, it's pretty easy to get into. It's very moist. A few stones in here yet. Still working on going through all those. But for the most part, it looks really good. We can get down in there about 6-7 inches. Take a look and see what the moisture looks like. As you can see, we already have some worms. They're still pretty inactive because the soil is still very cold yet. But we definitely like to see that worm activity in the soil. A lot of nice, rich material. There's still some small sticks and twigs, a little bit of biochar in here. In case you don't know what biochar is, that's burned wood, basically. Maybe I can do a video on that, but biochar is basically burned wood that is a very good carbon source for your soil. And you want to add that in there. You can use pre-made, pre-purchased biochar, or you can make it yourself in your fire pit if you use the right materials. You can always tell biochar because it's a dense piece of wood that has a char on the outside and has that black carbonization on it. So I've added some of that in there. I add compost every other year. So this is the year to add compost, and we're going to be going through exactly how I need to determine how much compost I need for the entire garden. So we took a look at the soil and noticed that it's in pretty good shape. We're definitely going to need to add some compost this year because, as I said, I typically do every other year. I'll have to top off the beds with some compost. Now, I have a compost bin that I produce compost in every year, but unfortunately, it doesn't make enough to top off all my beds. I have way too many beds in order to keep them full with compost with the one small pile that I have. And I just don't have the space or the organic materials to make nearly enough compost for my garden. So a lot of gardeners will, try to do their best to make as many compost piles as they can, but unfortunately for me, I just don't have the space here. My little urban homestead is pretty small. So what I have to do is I have to order compost in. In order for me to do that, I need to determine exactly how much I need every year or every other year when I order it, so that I get the right amount. I don't have too much left over, because if you have too much compost, where are you going to put it? And if you don't have enough, well, then your beds aren't going to be full. So I try to get just the right amount so that I can top off all my beds, and make sure that I have a nice fresh topping for all the new plants to grow this year. In order to determine how much compost I'm going to need, I'm going to actually take a measurement with a tape measure, and I can actually do a calculation. We'll do that back in the house, but that calculation is going to give me a very good estimate of how much compost I will need. So the first thing I do when I want to determine how much compost I'm going to need, I'm going to measure exactly how far down from the top the soil level is. Now, in a lot of these beds, I did not have any compost that I could add last year. I was able to pull compost from my bin to top off a couple of beds, but there's not nearly enough. So some of these beds have really depleted, and that's partially due to moisture loss. And the other part of that is due to just having multiple years of soil erosion from summer and winter rain, snow, washing the soil away over time. Even though they're in raised beds, the soil will eventually erode away. I found, like I said, I have to top this up at least every other year. Otherwise, there's nothing left in my beds to grow. So what I do is I just take a tape measure and I measure down pretty much to the top of the soil, and it gives me, in this case, I have about 4 inches of room in this top of the soil right here. If I level this off, I go down, measure, it says about 5 inches. I'm going to say about 4 inches of compost for this bed, because I don't need to have it exactly to the tip top. I keep it about an inch below the top. So this bed here is going to need about 4 inches of compost. Now, how much is that when you order it, or if you purchase it by the bag? We're going to figure that out in the house, and that's how we're going to determine exactly how much compost we're going to need. This is Walter, my helper. I thought it'd be kind of nice to add him in because he does a really great job of eating all of my crabgrass. Anyway, everybody out there, say hi to Walter. Give him a little bit of love. All right, now we're going to let him get back to eating all my weeds. All right, so I've taken a look at all the beds, and it looks like I'm going to need about 4 inches in most of the beds. This one here is also a little bit on the low side. If I take a measurement on this, this goes down actually 7 inches. So I may want to actually average about 5 inches per bed, because if I needed 4 inches over there, 7 inches on this one, the beds over here for my potatoes and brassica, they are at least 4 or 5 inches low. So if I estimate about 5 inches of need for my compost, I should have absolutely plenty for this year. Now, in addition to that, another project that I have this spring is to get some mulch laid down. I was gifted about 40 bags of this brown mulch from my neighbor across the street, and he was kind enough to give it to me. He had an entire trailer full. So I was gifted this mulch, and I got to get this laid out today. And so we're going to be working on that. And these bags may not go around all the beds, but I want to make sure I get them in between each bed, because that's where a lot of the weeds tend to congregate. And if I can at least get in between the beds full and in front of the beds, I'll really cut down on my weeds for this year. It's always a hassle to have to pull the weeds and cut the weeds out of the walkways, and if I don't pull them and cut them out, I'll have thistle in the walkway, and then I end up with an incredible amount of thorny thistle, and it just tears up my legs if I'm wearing shorts. So I want to make sure that I get this mulch down. I'll play it through in fast forward motion so you don't have to sit and be bored, but we're going to get this down and see how it looks when it's finished. One quick thing I wanted to mention is I was going through these beds. As you can see here, I have all my mulch down from last year, and I also have some of my posts that I stake up different plants with. When I move these out of the way, you can actually see right here a beautiful kale plant that I had in the garden last year. This was a nice large mound of kale. Because it was doing so well into the fall, I didn't want to pull it out. So I went ahead and left it in all the way up until the snow covered it, and I thought it killed it off. But actually, as you can see right here, we have a beautiful kale plant coming back right here and right here. So this plant actually survived the winter. So I'm not going to pull it out. I'm going to cover up this area here and let these grow as they normally would. I'll cut back all of the dead materials, but I'm going to let this kale grow this spring so we can have some kale salads very early on. I'm going to show you, zoom in on this. As you can see, this kale is just absolutely healthy. Beautiful kale. And I did absolutely nothing to help this grow. It grew right off of this stalk from last year on the original kale plant sitting over there. And because I covered a lot of this bed with mulch and other materials, it kept the soil warm enough to not kill off the roots through the winter. So as you can see, I have a lot of kale coming up in all these little areas here, and a brand new kale plant that I did not have to plant. It just goes to show you folks that gardens want to live. They want to provide you with food. And if you give them just a little bit of love and care, they will do just that. I found that the easiest way to get bagged mulch into the area that you want it is to leave it in the bag until it gets to the exact area that you want to place it. So what I'm going to do is just take all of these bags, about 40 of them, get them put exactly where I want the mulch to be, then I'll just break them open, empty them out, and spread them nice. I'm figuring I'm going to get about 3 bags per row. But we'll see how it actually goes once I get it in there. What I'm trying to do is get about a 3-inch layer down. And I don't know if 3 bags is going to do it. So I'm going to start with 3, do a row, and determine whether or not I'm going to need more. Alright, so I moved this flower pot in order to get some mulch down in this area. And the first thing I noticed underneath here was a ton of grubs. In case you wanted to know, these grubs are real pests in your garden. If you have seen them, you want to get rid of them. These grow up, they'll be munching on your roots of your plants as they grow, and they'll definitely cause a lot of problems in the future. So you do not want to keep these in the garden. You can kill them off with chemicals, but I found that as long as I just go ahead and pick them out when I see them, it really keeps the population down quite a bit. So definitely get rid of these buggers if you see them. You do not want them in your garden. They will not do well for your plants. I think you guys get the idea. I'm going to keep going forward with this. Get all these lines finished up, and I'll show you the finished product. You don't need to sit here and watch me do this all day. See you in a few minutes. That was quite a bit of work for my first day back outside. I know now that as I get older, it gets a little bit harder to get all this stuff done all in one day. So now I'm back inside. This part of the episode is brought to you by Noon Whistle, Hop Prism Blue IPA. And before you ask, no, the beer actually is not blue, which was a little bit of a disappointment for me. Anyway, so now that we're back inside, we can actually do our calculation and find out exactly how much compost we're going to need. Purchasing compost, you can either do it by the bag, from your local big box store or, greenhouse, what have you, or you can go the bulk route. I have a local landscape company that provides me with all the compost that I need for the year. You can choose, there's different types of compost you can purchase. I personally purchase mushroom compost. Mushroom compost is basically a substrate that's made from horse manure, chicken manure, various manures, along with some lime that's used to grow mushrooms in trays in large warehouses in the dark. And the mushrooms actually help break the manure down into compost throughout the process of the mushrooms growing. And then when they're done with it, they obviously harvest all the mushrooms, leave the compost sit for a while in a pile, and then they sell it as a garden amendment. So I purchased mushroom compost. There's various other types you're going to find in the bag or at your local greenhouse, warehouse, or whatever. But what I typically do is I order it by the yard. The company that I go with has I think it's a 2-yard minimum, so we'll see exactly once I do the calculation how many I'm going to actually need. So as you remember from earlier in the video, I measured, some beds I was measuring 4 or 5 inches, some beds I was averaging, 7 inches, and that, if I were to, just average it out and I say, let's just go with a straight 5-inch rule. Some beds may be a little low, some beds may have too much. So let's just do 5 inches straight across the board, and hopefully we'll be set with that. In order to make that calculation, you have to determine your square footage of the amount of space that you need to fill. Now, each of my beds, not all the beds, but most of the beds are 12 foot by 3 foot. The 12 by 3 gives me 36 square feet, not cubic feet, square feet for one garden bed. Now, the easiest way to do this conversion is to make everything in inches. And I know it seems like the numbers are going to be higher, but trust me, that's the easiest way for me anyway to get the right amount that I need every year. So 12 feet in inches is 144 inches. 3 feet in inches is 36 inches. So really my bed size when I convert it to inches is 144 by 36 inches. Now I'm going to put a graphic up on the screen here to show you what I'm talking about. And so what you do is to find the square of the garden bed, you take the 144 by 36, and that gives you 5,184 square inches. That's the size of the bed. Now, I need 5 inches of compost for each bed. I need to take that 5,184 and multiply it by 5. So that number comes out to 25,920 cubic inches needed per bed. Now that seems like a lot, and actually it actually is. That's my garden beds are quite depleted this year. So basically what I do then, if I now that I have the number of cubic inches that I need per bed, I just multiply it by the number of beds that I have. Now, as I said before, most of my beds are 12 foot by 3 foot, but I have a couple of smaller ones as well. What I'll do is I'll combine those together. So my total need, we're going to say, is 13 beds. So 13 beds at 25,920 cubic inches leaves me with 336,960 cubic inches. Now that seems like an atrociously high number, and actually that's more than I want to buy this year. But now you get that number, and that's the cubic inches that you're going to need for your garden. Now your number may be more, it may be less, it really depends on the size of your garden. That's your cubic inches for the total need for your garden, whatever that number may be. Now you can use Google to convert it to either cubic feet, if you're looking to buy bagged compost, or you can convert it to cubic yards if you're looking to buy it in bulk. Now the conversion that I use on Google, very easy to do. Just type in your Google search bar, convert this amount to that amount, and it does it for you automatically. Makes it very simple. When I did that calculation, it came out to 7.2 cubic yards or 195 cubic feet. That's a lot of compost. So, the local company that I work with can only carry 5 cubic yards per load in the back of their truck. Your compost company might be a little bit different. But there's no way I'm going to order 7 yards of compost this year because it'll destroy my back and I'll be shoveling compost for a month of Sundays. So I'm not going to go that high. I'm probably going to do 3 or 4 yards. I will not fill every one of my beds to the top. It's just not going to happen this year. And what I'll do is I'll take an assessment again next year. So instead of doing an every other year compost purchase, I will purchase compost 2 years sequentially. And that way, I can kind of knock down the cost this year and spread it out towards next year. Now that means I've got to shovel compost for 2 seasons, but hey, it is what it is. It was a light year last year. The company that I had delivered my compost, not last year, 2 years ago, it was back during more of the height of COVID, and they didn't have as much of the materials as I needed. So I actually didn't fill my beds 2 years ago, and that's part of the reason why my beds are so depleted as they are right now. Now, the beds get depleted because of soil erosion over time. The soil settles. Organic materials, in living soil, organic materials provide a structure. That structure is not very dense. As you can see, when I was outside, I was able to dig my hand straight into the soil without having to use a spade or any other kind of implement. It's very light, it's very airy, but over time it does compact down. So that compaction, combined with moisture loss from having a very cold and dry winter, caused all of that material to shrink. And then, the addition of erosion, which does happen in garden beds, causes that to go down even further. So that's why I'm really as depleted as I am in these beds. So I'm going to need to fill them to the top, I'm going to need 7.2 cubic yards. But, like I said, I can't do that this year. That's just too much work, too much time, and way too much material. That'll take up most of my front driveway, so I can't do 7 yards. So I'm probably, like I said, I'm going to do 3 or 4 yards, get those beds filled. They might be about an inch or two from the top, but that's all right for this year. And then next year, it'll have depleted a little bit again, and I can get another 3 or 4 yards, and it'll be right to the top. So that's how I'm going to do it for this year. I can't make the order now because what I need to do is wait until they're open on Monday morning to get that finished, to get that ordered in. And they usually deliver it within 24 hours, and then I'll have to spend a day or two shoveling that into the backyard because they don't actually deliver to the garden beds. They'll deliver to your home, and then you have to wheelbarrow it to your backyard. And what you really need for that basically is a very broad shovel. I use a snow shovel actually because that's the easiest. Or you can use a compost fork if you have one of those. I have one, but I find that the snow shovel works a little bit better. And a good hefty wheelbarrow, and you'll be able to get all that stuff right into your garden beds. Take your time. Don't overdo it. You're going to stress yourself out or hurt your back or anything like that. You don't want to do that. I notice that as I get older, I have to take more breaks and slow down just a little bit because it's not like it was back when I was in my 20s and 30s. So get that compost in there, and your garden beds will be ready for planting. Hopefully, I'll have that done in the next week to 2 weeks so I can get stuff in the ground. I'm going to try to use the compost that I made in my compost bins to fill up certain areas that I want to plant in early. I want to get some brassicas in. That's your lettuce and kale and spinach and that. I want to get that in before it gets too warm because that stuff doesn't grow well once the weather gets too hot. So I'm going to use my homemade compost to fill up the beds in certain areas so I can get my early plants in the next week or so. That should have been done a while ago, but I'm kind of behind on things this season. And then what I have left to fill up, that's what the ordered compost will take care of. And then once all that's in, basically, when the compost gets delivered, it's hot. And I don't mean just physically hot because it does steam a little bit when you get the compost in. You go digging into that thing and steam starts coming out of it, and it's very warm. It's a very active compost. But not only is it physically hot, but hot compost means that it's in a very active process. And you want to be able to give that compost a chance to rest a little bit after it's in your bed and cool down so that the process of composting slows so that it doesn't burn the roots of your plants. So once you get the compost in the bed, it's going to be mounded a little bit. Try to mound it towards the center of whatever bed you're putting it in. Or if you're just having a rectangular piece of earth, you mound it on that earth. Let it settle for a couple of days so that it can just smooth down, cool off a little bit. Let the rain hit it, let the wind hit it, and it'll settle down. And then your compost will be ready to plant in. If you plant in it too early, that's you plant in that hot compost and it can damage your plants because it's just way too active at that point. But anyway, that's all there is to it. Get your compost ordered or purchased at your big box store. I don't know what it costs. $5, $6, $7 a bag, whatever it might be, depending on the sales you find. Like in my case, I need 195 cubic feet. And if it's a 2 cubic foot bag, I'd need 100 bags at $5, $6 a bag. I'd be spending, good Lord, I'd be spending $600 on compost. I can't do that. If I order 3 yards from my local landscape company delivered to my house, usually I can get it for about $40 a yard or so. It depends on the company, depends on what kind of deal you can get. I've ordered from them for a number of years, so they give me a pretty good deal every year on delivery and everything. So anyway, if you like this video, please give me a thumbs up down below, and please subscribe for more content. I got a lot more garden stuff coming out, and not just garden either. There's a lot of things that happen in everybody's life. I've got my pool I got to open up, and there's some good videos I want to make on that because, there's all sorts of things that I do DIY around the house, and so you're not just going to be getting garden content. But please like and subscribe, and I will see you all in the next video. Have a great rest of your day. All right. Oh. Oh, shit. All right, we're going to start this again. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Damn.